So this might end up being the last video in the Gather Top-Down series, at least unless I add some bonus content. What we're going to do in this video is make it so that we have a simple UI for swapping out the tool on our harvesting script by clicking buttons on the screen to select the right tool, equip that to the harvesting script, and also update the sprite renderer whenever this tool property is set in the harvesting script. So right now we can still harvest our trees, we can collect all the resources. But one thing I did notice is that sometimes when we're picking up the resources on the gravity script, it will make the tracked objects actually null there because they're removed from the scene. They no longer exist, but the list hasn't been updated. So in order to solve that, I will remove any existing null resources from the list of resources before we go in here to this for each loop and translate each of the valid resources. So before the for each, we're going to do underscore nearby resources dot remove all, and then we'll do x is not equal to null. Oh, actually, wait, hold on. We want that to be equal to null. So we remove all of the null resources. So this x is the parameter of the resource pickup being passed into this lambda expression, where we're grabbing all of the x, which is resource pickup, that are equal to null. And you know what, actually? It would probably be a lot more clear if we rename that parameter to pickup. So we're removing all of the pickups where pickup is null before we go into this for each. So we guarantee that at this for each loop, all of the pickups still in the list are valid. So that should clear up that issue where occasionally you'd have the null pickup but still being tracked in that list of pickups. So now as for swapping out with the UI, first I want to jump into the harvesting script. So let's edit the harvesting script. And what I want to change here is on this tool property. Right now we just have a simple private setter function, which means that we'll set the tool, but nothing else happens. But with a setter function or getter function, you can add extra lines of code, meaning that whenever the tool is set, something else is going to run. Now, this does mean that we can't have the automatic backing field, so we'll need to change the script up a little bit here. So below the tool property, I'm going to have a private tool field, and I'll call this underscore tool. So this is still the field. We can serialize it in the inspector if we want with serialize field. You don't need the field part because this is already a field. And now we can set a custom getter and setter function. So let's redo this bit here. I'm going to do get, and the get is going to return underscore tool. Okay, and then set, which I want to make a private set, is if the value being passed in is not the already existing tool. Something went wrong down here. I think we gotta finish the brackets for that to set up correctly. So just make sure you have the right number of curly braces. And then if the tool that is already set does not equal the value being passed in the new tool, then we're going to make the current tool equal to the value. But we're also going to update the sprite. So basically, whenever we set the tool, we want to update all the other objects that are dependent on that tool value. So then to update the sprite, we need to find the sprite renderer on the harvesting game object. So private sprite renderer underscore renderer. And then we can get that on start. So underscore renderer equals get component sprite renderer. And then while the game's running, we can now update it. So underscore renderer dot sprite is going to be equal to the tool dot icon. Now this would technically work, updating the sprite by setting the icon to the sprite, but I think that the tool should have another field just in case the graphics are different between the icon you're using for the UI and the actual visual that you want to use in the game world. So let's create another property here. And maybe we want to call this new field the sprite, more implying it's visual in the game world rather than the icon for the UI. So let's control period on this and generate the property. I'm going to right click on the property name, go to definition, which will bring us into the tool script. So we can serialize the backing field, just like we did with everything else. And I think I want to take this property and move it up here to where we have icon. And I want to take the set and make that a private instead of an internal. So we'll have field, serialize field, public sprite, sprite, get private set. Now if we go back out to the game world, we want to take the tools in our project and set the sprite for its visual in the actual game, which in this case is the same as the icon, but it doesn't have to be because they're separate fields now. So let's get the gold axe here for this one. Here we'll use the silver axe, and then pickaxe tool copper. So copper pickaxe. So now those tools are set up properly. So before we hit play and test things, we also want to make sure that the tool, whatever it's set to, will be the sprite display at the start of our script. So let's change the script up a little bit. First off, if we set a tool value, the tool could be null, which would mean that the sprite renderer is null, and then the sprite here doesn't exist because the renderer doesn't exist, so we'd get an error there. So we want to check if the tool does not equal null. Then we'll set the renderer sprite as we were before. Otherwise, the renderer.sprite is going to be equal to null. And this is something we also want to set at the start of our script, just to have it update once outside of this tool set property. So let's take this code and turn it into its own method. So quick actions, extract method, and I'll say update. And now that we have a function, we can just take this down here and call it on start as well. So this bit right here, I'll turn into the description. So now let's summarize this function. So we're updating the sprite to show the sprite of the equipped tool. Okay, now if we go back out to the game, right now the tool is set to none. If we hit play, then you'll see that the sprite is now set to none. And if we change out the tool, like tool axe copper, oh, well, that's not going to work right there because we're setting it in the inspector. So this right here is the field. It would only change if we set the property now. So to set it using the property, we would need actual code to do that. And then now let's create our UI buttons in order to set the harvesting script using the property rather than the inspector. Okay, so in the hierarchy, let's right click and I'm going to do UI. Let's just go with button text mesh pro. In order to use text mesh pro, which is the default standard in Unity nowadays, you do have to import the essentials into your project. So just go ahead and do that, which would just bring in whatever's required for the script to run. And then we have our button here. So I'm going to take the text and let's just get rid of the text from this button. And then I'm going to take the button and let's rename it set axe copper button. Okay, and then we want to set the graphic for our button. So I think we changed that at the source image here. So let's change that to copper axe. Okay, and for the sprite to, be kind of more clear, let's change the width and height to be similar. So if we do 80 by 80, or let's double that, 160 by 160, then now this button is stretched to a size that corresponds with the original ratio on the image, so it looks proper. So another thing we want to make sure is that our UI elements scale with whatever our screen size is. So right now in game view, if I take the resolution and I change it to something higher, like full HD, you'll see that the button shrinks correspondingly because it didn't resize with the screen. And if we go something very low, like 640 by 480, you can see that it's not scaling as well. So to fix that, we go to the canvas, which is automatically created when you add your first UI button. Take the UI scale mode for canvas scaler and change that to scale with screen size. Now just set the default screen size that you want to be the base resolution, and it will just scale accordingly based on if it's higher or lower than that base resolution. So we could try something like 1280 by 720 if we want. And then now whatever values you set here for set copper axe button is going to be roughly the size it looks on the screen, regardless of what size it is. So if I change it to 1280, then you can see it's the same size. If we shrink down to 320, it's the same size. So that is how you get it to scale up and down. Now let's add a couple extra buttons here. So I'm going to Control D a couple times. And you'll notice that these buttons don't spread out in a grid automatically. For that to happen, we need to go to the canvas. And let's right click inside of here and create a new UI panel, which will give us a background. But it can also serve as the grid component, where any buttons beneath it will spread out across a horizontal or vertical layout automatically. Then take all three of these buttons and move them into the panel. And then on the panel game object, add in a component. So I think it's a grid layout group is what we're looking for. So grid layout group. Okay, you can see that immediately our 3 buttons are now layered over here. But we're going to want to reposition this to the bottom of our screen. So the panel, I'm going to take this stretch thing over here and hold Control Alt and Shift down, and then click on this center bottom one, which is going to set the pivot point, the anchor point, and the position to the bottom middle. So click on that twice. And the reason nothing happened yet is that the width and height are still set to the screen size. So change this to something more like 400 by 100. Okay, and then we have something of a rudimentary hotbar at the bottom of the screen. I might change this to 300 or 325. Just find a size that looks good for you. So down here at the bottom for the grid layout group, we can kind of organize it a bit. So I think we can get the children to be middle center, which will position it halfway between the left side and the right side, kind of making it look a little bit more organized. The cell size, if you change that, that's going to set the size of the buttons. So I think that might actually override whatever we set before for the copper axe button. You can see that now the values are being determined by the grid layout group. So the grid layout group controls your button sizes now. So for the other buttons, let's change their name to be something more like hotbar 2. And then the third one can be hotbar 3. And then the first one, hotbar button 1. Let's call them hotbar button 1, hotbar button 2, hotbar button 3. Because theoretically, you know, when you're making a game, you might make it so that the buttons can do other things rather than just change out one single item. It might be able to change out whatever item is actually equipped to that slot. A bit more advanced than, you know, we're going into for this series. Let's take the hotbar button 2, and for right now, we'll set the axe to be axe gold, let's just say, and hotbar button 3. We'll take the sprite here and make it, let's say, pickaxe copper. Now, clicking these buttons isn't going to do anything right now if we go into play mode. So you can see we can click on them, but we do get a simple problem, which is that the action for clicking on the button is left mouse click, but it's also one of the actions we have set up for using the swing animation on our player, which is why I also added in the F key for controlling the swing animation. So that's why on our player, I'm just going to, for simplicity's sake, disable the left mouse button click for the use animation. So let's go in here to left mouse and just remove it from the use action. Okay, so if we save that, hit play, now clicking on these buttons is only going to trigger the buttons on click function. So right now the buttons don't actually do anything. So to make our buttons do something, let's add a new script. We can call it the equip tool script, create and add. So let's edit the script. In order to equip a tool, we'll need to know what tool is stored in this button slot. So do field, serialize field here, and we'll have a public tool. And for this one, you might actually want to make it a public setter function, because since it's meant to be attached to a hotbar, you might want to be able to change out what tool is going to be equipped when that button is pressed. So for now, we'll make the setter function not a private set, but a public set, which means other scripts would be able to access it and change it. We'll remove start and update, and then we'll have a function that we'll call on click. So this will be public void change tool. So to change the tool, we need to know which script we're trying to change it on. So there's a bunch of ways you can do that in Unity. Basically, we need to find the player object, and we need to find the harvesting component under it. So one way we could do it is search the scene for a player controller, and then once we have the player controller referenced, we take the game object of that and we search its children to find the harvesting script. So when our equip tool scripts start, let's get access to the harvesting script that we mean to change. So private harvesting, and we'll call this target harvesting component, or just target harvesting. Okay, so now on start, we want to get that component. So this won't be the most efficient way, because I'm just going to have it run once per equip tool script. You might have something like a manager script, which assigns the harvesting to each equip tool object in your game, so that you only need to run what I'm about to run once, rather than 3 times or 4 times. But it shouldn't honestly make that big of a difference for what we're doing here. So let's take the target harvesting, and we're going to find an object by type, and we're going to find the player controller. So theoretically, this is a single player game. There should only be one player controller. So we're going to find the player controller, And then we're going to get the component in its children, which is going to be the harvesting component. And then we're going to assign that to target harvesting. So whenever our script loads equip tool once per button, we're going to find the harvesting component on the player, and then we'll use that for assigning the tool. So you just have to get that reference once. It's better to do that something like on start rather than getting it once whenever you call change tool and for every time you call change tool. Unless you think that the player controller and the harvesting script are for some reason going to change objects or change locations, then you might end up with a null reference just doing this. But in our game, the player is never going away, at least while we're still able to change the tools out. So we're just going to go with this for now. But just in case the player was removed from the scene or something, we can check if target harvesting is still active. So if it's not null, then we're going to change the tool on the target harvesting. So target harvesting dot tool equals the tool from this equip tool. Okay, and we can see that that tool is not accessible because it has a private set. So let's right click into the definition and let's change the set to a public set instead of a private set. And then that will fix up that error. So when the target harvesting is no longer valid, we want to log some kind of warning. Just if we're still debugging our game and trying to figure out what's going on, this message can help us out a little bit. So we're going to say that the target harvesting component is no longer referenced. Is the player still active in the screen? Okay, so the reason I would set up this message would be that we might have a case where we kill off the player, but then we haven't taken the hotbar buttons and disabled them. So then this can kind of let us know that we're still trying to set tools or equipment items on the player, even though it's no longer active. So we might want to, in the future, disable our hotbar and all of the buttons from being able to be clicked on when the player is no longer active. So this can just kind of give us a clue when we're thinking about those kind of problems later on. Okay, so let's go back out to the game. We have our hotbar buttons, and we have the tools we can assign to them. So normally you'd have a bigger inventory system in order for like dragging tools from your inventory into these slots and setting them up there. But for our simple demo, we're just going to have the tools set up for each of these buttons off the bat. So I'm going to select the tool, copper X tool, hotbar button 2, let's add the script equip tool, and let's select the gold axe, and then hotbar button 3, let's add the tool equip tool, come down here and do tool pickaxe copper. So we have the items we're trying to equip to the player, and the equip tool script is going to reference that component where we actually equip the item to the player and the harvesting script. So now if we hit play, first off, you'll see that we have no tool, which is correct. So if we click on gather a tool, we have no tool, so there's no sprite showing. But if I click on copper axe, then it should change here, but it's not. So we'll have to figure out why that is. So clicking, okay, of course I know. So the hotbar buttons, they haven't had the on click assigned. So expand the button script, come down here to on click, drag in the equip tool script. So we need to define what happens when the button is clicked. Go to function equip tool and then do change tool. So we just need that for all three of them. So hotbar button 2, add a function to call when the event runs. Equip tool, change tool. Hotbar button 3, add the onClick function. So we drag in the equip tool script, equip tool, change tool. Okay, now let's go into play mode. We can click on the tools and they'll change out successfully. So we can equip the gold axe, we can equip the pickaxe, and cycle between these because they're updating the property of the tool on our harvestable script, which automatically updates the sprite renderer. So basically, changing out our tools now works, at least at a pretty rudimentary level. So let's test the pickaxe by swinging into here. Okay, so the pickaxe is working. Let's change to the copper axe and make sure this doesn't work. Okay, so it's still not working. The gold axe doesn't work as well. Let's finish off the rack, finishing off the rock with the pickaxe. Now let's try the gold axe. Okay, so you might remember that we had a min harvest and max harvest value set up for our tools. So the gold axe actually can harvest between 1 and 4 wood, where the copper axe can only harvest 1 and 2. So let's see if we can get 3 or 4 to spawn when we hit our trees here to demonstrate that the gold axe is actually an upgrade over the normal axe. So we hit once, we get 2. Second one is 2. Third one is 1. So we didn't get lucky there. Let's keep going till we get 3 or 4. Okay, so that was, I believe, 3 right there. Now we can only harvest the amount that's actually in the tree. So, you know, even if you roll a 4 with your random, you're still going to only get 2 if there's only 2 to harvest. And then we come to this tree, we get 2. This hit 1. Okay. And what we could actually do is just change these values in the inspector. So let's do 5 and 5 temporarily, and then hit this tree and it will die immediately. So we get 5 off the bat from our min and max harvest being a range of 5 to 5. Now, just be careful about your scriptable objects, because when you exit out of play mode, you can see that these values are still set to whatever I just set them to. So you're permanently changing the values of your scriptable object assets if you change the values, which is good if you want to keep it consistent for your game. You're updating how a item should be, but you got to be careful you don't change that during runtime unless you actually mean to permanently update it for your game, which is a very good reason to make it so that when you have these properties, that you make their setter functions private, so you're not accidentally changing those values across other scripts. Otherwise, you could cause yourself all kinds of problems. So that pretty much in a nutshell is going to be the conclusion of this series. We have our harvesting mechanics working, different types of resources we can collect using different tools, which we can equip through our hotbar. From here, I would probably try adding in different kinds of terrain or objects, or maybe you can consider some enemies. I have other tutorial series on my channel if you want to learn how to add in some basic enemies to your game. But that is basically going to be the resource harvesting mechanics for a simple gatherer top-down RPG. So I hope that this tutorial series has been very useful for everybody following along. If you watched to the end, thank you very much for doing so. I know that this was quite a in-depth tutorial. So once again, if you do want to grab the scripts, the demos, the art packs, everything you see in this series, you can get that on itch.io or on my Patreon. So thank you again for watching to the end. I've been Chris, and hopefully I'll see all of you in my future video content.